With us today, we have Pastor Don Mackintosh, who is the campus chaplain for the Weimar Institute. And Pastor Mackintosh, we've been talking about the subject of trust, and I was wondering if you could give us a definition of forgiveness, perhaps a little bit beyond the dictionary definition of it.
Well, first of all, trust is actually an act of the will. It's based on something we all have, which is intrinsic faith. And so trust is actually it's actually making a decision. And forgiveness is also an act of the will. So forgiveness is making a decision about someone who's hurt you, that you are going to, change the way you think about it. And it also involves saying, look, I'm going to have a positive feeling towards that person in the future.
So if somebody is maybe harboring unforgiveness in their heart, what kind of effects can this have on their health?
Terrible effects, both mentally and physically. Mental health can cause depression, anxiety, increased stress, increased cortisol levels. And so it's terrible on mental health. It's one of the best things to do to reverse mental health issues, and it's why we talk about it in the Depression Recovery Program like the first or second lecture, because it is a big thing. Secondly, in terms of physical health, increases all the different things like hypertension. It decreases blood flow to the heart. And so you have a risk of heart attack, you have a risk of stroke, you have a risk of increased hypertension, all these different things. Back in my nursing days, I saw all these things happening. And long-term can cause headache, can cause insomnia, can cause eczema, can cause all kinds of problems physically. So it's not something you want to dismiss.
And could it be the case that oftentimes people maybe are unconscious of the health effects that unforgiveness is having on their life? Because often events can happen and then we can easily forget about them and go on with life and not maybe realize that these things are continuing to have an effect on us.
Sure, it can be underlying, sort of like your cell phone has a bunch of apps running. You don't realize it's sapping your strength and energy, but it really is. It's having a huge impact on you.
So what do you give somebody who's in this position? What kind of steps can you give them to go towards practically forgiving somebody, especially if they might still harbor distrust or maybe anxiety or other negative emotions?
Well, number one, they have to realize it's an issue. It's not something to dismiss. It can cause severe health problems, both mental health and physical health, like we said. So it's not helping you, and it's probably not helping the person you're not forgiving. They may not even know you're not forgiving them. So there's an old proverb that just says, unforgiveness is dangerous to yourself and also the other person. You might as well dig two graves. But some practical steps. Number one is strengthen your frontal lobe function. That's actually because you forgive in your frontal lobe. It's an act of the will. How do you strengthen your frontal lobe function? This is exercise. This is proper nutrition. It's everything we learn at New Start. If you went through the whole acronym, nutrition, exercise, water, sunlight, temperance, air, rest, trust, do all those things because you have to have an optimal frontal lobe function to be able to exercise that will. Number two, recognize that forgiveness there's spiritual elements that have to be understood. Forgiveness is not lack of anger. You can be angry about something. It's just a limited anger. Great psalm on that is Psalm 109. Shows a person getting very angry. And then it's also not the absence of consequence. Great psalm is Psalm 99, verse 8. You did forgive them, but you did avenge their deeds. So in other words, you're handing it over to God. He takes care of the vengeance. So recognize that. We could say a lot more about that. I think number three is to start to reframe things. Think about things that have been done to you and ask yourself this question. What is the positive thing that came out of that negative experience? So you have a negative experience, you all know what that is, but try and discipline yourself. There's been studies that show this is effective, by the way. Try and discipline yourself to see something positive about it. Then focus on the positive rather than the negative. I'm more empathetic. I'm more able to sympathize with people who go through this situation. In other words, now you're looking at it with a bigger frame, and you actually can turn that weakness into a strength.
Wow, so you're essentially flipping it on its head, taking something that produced so much negativity and trying to pull something positive.
Now think about it. I mean, the Judeo-Christian story, both in the Old Testament and the New, sacrificing something was seen as quite negative, and yet it was actually something positive because you went to the temple, you sacrificed, you could let it go. It was negative, something died, but it was also positive. What about the ultimate sacrifice according to a New Testament Christian? That's the sacrifice of Christ. Very bad thing. Bad, bad, bad. But It's also very good because it actually takes the debt, it takes the penalty, it takes everything upon itself so that you can go forward free. The worst thing actually becomes the best thing. And then I think third, or finally, if you're thinking about forgiveness, is study examples of forgiveness. Look at Jesus, who said, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Look at Corrie ten Boom. Look at Joyce Meyer. Look at some of these examples of forgiveness in Christian history.
So we've learned about the value of forgiving others, especially when they've done us wrong, but is there value in forgiving ourselves, perhaps for acts that we've done to others that are wrong?
This is a big thing, self-forgiveness. We think about it a lot. There are studies that show that one of the best ways to self-forgive is to actually make restitution to the person if possible, or in some way give back. The person might be dead, so you can't give anything back to them, but try and make restitution. And of course, there's a Bible story like this. His name was Zacchaeus. He was a wee little man, but he realized he did some things wrong, and he repaid fourfold. And studies have shown that there's an act of restitution that helps you self-forgive. But also remember this, ultimately the person that forgives is God, not you. And trust Him. I mean, you're going to have to ultimately trust that He ultimately is the judge. He's the one that took all the pain and problems on Himself, and He's actually the one that provides true forgiveness. And we have to trust Him. You know, though our heart condemns us, He does not, it says in 1 John 3. So He's greater than our heart, and He understands and knows all things. So trusting God, trust.
Well, Pastor Macintosh, I really appreciate you coming and sharing that with us today, and I hope that these are things that we can implement into our lives to have more peace and to have health from forgiveness.
Sure.